Some places don't let go of their ghosts. They cling to them like a curse, and the old Riverside textile factory on the outskirts of Detroit, Michigan, was one of those places. A crumbling tomb of brick and steel that hadn't seen a living soul in years. Not since the fire that turned it into a graveyard for 27 workers. Michael, a 35-year-old night shift security guard, thought he could handle the job. Thought the stories of shadows and screams were just old tales to scare new hires. But he was wrong, dead wrong. On a rainy night, with the power flickering and the air thick with dread, he got a call that wasn't just a sound, but a scream from the past, pulling him into a nightmare that would follow him for the rest of his life. 10 years after the fire that killed dozens, the factory was still burning, its ghosts still screaming, and Michael was about to become part of their story. A story that wouldn't let him go, no matter how far he ran. Michael pulled his jacket tighter as he stepped off his beat-up motorcycle, the rain pouring down in heavy sheets, soaking his boots before he even reached the factory gate. It was 10:55 p.m., and the night shift stretched ahead like a long, dark tunnel he had to walk through alone. He'd been working at the Riverside textile factory for 3 months, ever since the security company he worked for took the contract to guard the place. The factory had been shut down for a decade, ever since a fire tore through it in 2015, killing 27 workers. Mostly women who'd been working the late shift, stitching clothes for big retail chains. The official report blamed faulty wiring, but the whispers told a darker story. That the fire wasn't an accident, that the owner had locked the doors to keep the workers inside, that their screams still echoed in the walls, their shadows still moved in the dark. Michael didn't believe in ghosts. He'd laughed off the stories the day guards told him, tales of cries in the night, a woman in a burnt uniform who watched from the windows, sewing machines that hummed when the power was off. But as he unlocked the gate, the rusted metal creaking under his hands, he felt a chill that wasn't just from the rain, a heaviness in the air that made his skin crawl. The factory loomed ahead, a giant skeleton of brick and broken glass, its smokestacks black against the stormy sky, the windows like empty eyes staring down at him. Michael hurried to the control room, a small concrete box near the entrance, its walls stained with watermarks, the air smelling of dust and old paper. He flicked on the lights, the fluorescent bulbs buzzing to life, flickering like they couldn't decide if they wanted to stay on. The control room was his base for the night. 2 chairs, a desk, a row of CCTV screens showing grainy black and white feeds of the factory, and an old landline phone that hadn't rung in years, its cord frayed like it had been chewed by rats. Michael set his thermos of coffee on the desk, his flashlight beside it, and checked his watch. 11 p.m. His shift had just begun. The first couple of hours were quiet, the only sound the rain tapping on the roof, the wind howling through the broken windows of the factory. Michael sipped his coffee, the warmth doing little to chase away the cold that seemed to seep from the walls. He flipped through a tattered magazine, trying to ignore the flickering lights, the way the bulbs dimmed every few minutes, casting shadows that danced across the room. At 1:30 a.m., the landline rang, a sharp, jarring sound that made him jump, his coffee spilling over the desk. He stared at the phone, his heart pounding, the ring echoing in the small room. "Who's calling at this hour?" he muttered, wiping his hands on his jeans. The factory had been abandoned for years. No one should have the number, and the day guard swore the line was dead. He picked up the receiver, his hand shaking, and pressed it to his ear. "Hello?" he said, his voice loud in the silence. No one answered, just static, crackling like a fire, and then, faint but clear, the sound of sewing machines, their needles humming in a rhythm that sent a shiver down his spine. Underneath it, a woman was sobbing, her cries soft and broken, like she was trying to hold them in but couldn't. "Hello? Who's there?" Michael said, louder this time, but the sounds didn't stop. The machines kept humming, the sobbing grew louder, and then the line went dead, the silence heavier than before. He set the receiver down, his hands trembling, his eyes darting to the CCTV screens. The factory was empty, the feeds showing nothing but shadows and dust, but his gut told him something was wrong. Something was awake in this place. He grabbed his flashlight, the beam shaking as he pointed it at the door, and checked the screens again. The stitching hall feed camera 4 caught his eye. There was movement, a flicker of something passing in front of the lens, too quick to make out. The stitching hall was on the second floor, a huge room where the workers had once sat at rows of machines, stitching shirts and pants for stores across the country. No one had been in there in years. The doors were locked, the machines covered in dust, the air thick with the smell of ash. Michael's job was to check on anything strange, but every part of him screamed to stay put, to ignore it, to wait until morning. But he couldn't. He'd lose his job if something happened on his watch, and he needed the money, needed to pay his rent and support his mom back in Flint. He took a deep breath, grabbed his keys, and stepped out into the rain. The factory was a maze of dark hallways, the walls stained black from the fire, the floor littered with broken glass and bits of charred fabric. Michael's flashlight cut through the dark, the beam bouncing as he climbed the stairs to the second floor, his boots echoing in the silence. The air grew colder with every step, his breath fogging in front of him, the smell of ash stronger now, mixed with something sour, like burnt hair. He reached the stitching hall, the double doors rusted shut, a heavy padlock securing them. He unlocked it, the metal creaking as he pushed the doors open, the sound loud in the quiet. The hall was huge, rows of sewing machines stretching into the dark, their shapes like hunched figures waiting for him. The air was freezing, so cold it hurt to breathe, but the power was off. The lights, the machines, everything should have been dead. He stepped inside, his flashlight sweeping the room, the beam catching on cobwebs and dust, the machines covered in grime. The humming he'd heard on the phone was gone, the hall silent except for the drip of rain through the broken roof. "Hello?" he called, his voice small, swallowed by the dark. Nothing answered, but the cold grew sharper, his fingers numb as he gripped the flashlight. He walked deeper into the hall, his boots crunching on ash, his eyes darting to the shadows. At the far end of the room, he saw her. A woman, sitting at one of the machines, her back to him, her uniform charred and torn, the fabric hanging off her like skin. Her hair was long and dark, matted with soot, her hands moving like she was sewing. Though the machine was still, the needle rusted in place. Michael's heart stopped, his breath catching as he took a step closer, the flashlight shaking in his hand. "Ma'am," he said, his voice barely a whisper. She didn't turn, didn't move, just kept sewing, her hands steady, her head bowed. He took another step, the cold biting at his skin, and then she vanished. Gone in a blink, the chair empty, the machine silent. He stumbled back, his flashlight dropping, the beam spinning across the floor. A loud bang echoed through the hall, a heavy thud that shook the walls, and then the fire alarm went off. A shrill, screaming wail that hadn't worked since the fire 10 years ago. The sound tore through him, his hands clapping over his ears, his eyes wide as he ran for the doors. The alarm chasing him down the stairs, the factory waking up around him. He sprinted back to the control room, his boots slipping on the wet floor, the alarm still screaming, the lights flickering faster now, the shadows stretching like they were alive. He slammed the door shut, his hands shaking as he locked it, his breath coming in gasps. The CCTV screens were glitching, the feeds jumping, static crackling across them. Then they all showed the same thing, a loop over and over. Charred figures running through the stitching hall, their screams silent but their mouths open wide, the fire consuming them, their hands clawing at the locked doors, their bodies falling as the flames took them. Michael stared, his heart pounding, the images burning into his eyes. The same women, the same fire, the same night that had killed them. He screamed, his voice lost in the alarm's wail, and then the screens went black, the room dark except for the flicker of his flashlight. The cold so sharp it felt like knives in his lungs. He stumbled back, his legs giving out, and everything went black as he hit the floor. He woke up in a hospital bed, the smell of antiseptic sharp in his nose, the beeping of a monitor steady beside him. His head throbbed, his hands bandaged, his throat dry as he blinked at the bright lights. A nurse stood over him, her face kind but tired, her voice soft as she said, "You're lucky they found you." Michael's colleagues had found him at the factory gate that morning, unconscious, his flashlight still in his hand, his face pale as death. They'd called an ambulance, thinking he'd had a heart attack, but the doctors couldn't find anything wrong. Just exhaustion, they said, and a few scratches on his hands he couldn't explain. He didn't tell them about the woman, the call, the screens. He didn't tell anyone. Not even his boss when he resigned that day, his voice shaking as he handed over his badge. "I can't go back," he said, his eyes hollow, his hands trembling. His boss didn't ask why, just nodded, like he'd seen it before. Michael moved back to his hometown, a small place an hour from Detroit, hoping the distance would help, that the quiet fields and familiar faces would erase what he'd seen. But the factory followed him. Every night, at exactly 1:30 a.m., he'd wake up, the sound of sewing machines humming in his ears, the woman's sobbing echoing in his skull. He'd see her in his dreams, sitting at the machine, her burnt uniform hanging off her, her face hidden until she turned, her eyes black, her mouth open in a silent scream, her hands reaching for him. He stopped sleeping, his days a blur of fear, his nights a prison he couldn't escape. He'd sit by the window, staring at the fields, waiting for 1:30, waiting for the hum, the sobs, the cold that came with them. The factory was gone, but its ghosts weren't. They'd found him and they weren't letting go. Back in Detroit, the day guards at Riverside started talking, their voices low as they shared what they'd heard. Michael wasn't the first to quit after a night shift. There'd been others, guards who'd seen things, heard things, who'd left with the same hollow look in their eyes. One of them, an older man named Carl, had worked there a year after the fire, back when the factory was still being cleaned up. He'd heard the sewing machines too, seen the woman in the burnt uniform, her face charred but her eyes alive, watching him from the shadows. "She's always there," Carl told the others, his voice shaking as he lit a cigarette, the smoke curling in the morning air. "She's looking for someone to take her place." The guards nodded, their faces pale, their eyes darting to the factory, its windows dark but watching. Michael's cousin, Ryan, came to visit a week after he moved back, his face worried as he saw the bags under Michael's eyes, the way his hands shook as he poured coffee. "You don't look good, man," Ryan said, his voice soft, his eyes searching. Michael tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm fine," he lied, but Ryan didn't believe him. That night, at 1:30 a.m., Ryan woke to Michael's screams, found him sitting up in bed, his eyes wide, his hands clawing at the air. "She's here," Michael whispered, his voice raw, his gaze fixed on the corner of the room. Ryan looked. There was nothing there, just shadows and moonlight. But the air was cold, the room heavy with the smell of ash, the faint hum of sewing machines drifting through the walls. "Who's here?" Ryan asked, his voice trembling, but Michael didn't answer, just stared, his breath fogging in the frigid air. Ryan stayed for a week, sleeping in the same room, waking every night to Michael's screams, the hum, the cold that came like clockwork. He started asking around in the town, talking to the old-timers, the ones who remembered the factory, the fire, the stories that had grown around it. An old man named Henry, his hands gnarled from years of working in the auto plants, told him the truth, or what he believed was the truth. "That factory was built on bad land," Henry said, his voice low, his eyes distant as he stared at the fields. "Before the factory, there was a burial ground there, old, forgotten, the kind of place you don't mess with. They dug it up to build, didn't care about the bones, the spirits. The fire, it woke something up, something that was already angry. Those women, they didn't just die, they were trapped, and now they trap others." Ryan went back to Michael, his face pale, his hands shaking as he told him what Henry had said. "You need help, man," he said, his voice urgent. "A priest, someone who can pray, who can break this." Michael nodded, his eyes hollow, but he didn't believe it would work. Not really. The next day, they called a priest from a nearby town, a man named Father Daniel, his hair gray and thinning, his eyes sharp as he listened to Michael's story, the hum, the woman, the dreams. "This is not just a ghost," Father Daniel said, his voice steady, his hands clutching a rosary. This is a curse, tied to the land, to the fire. We need to go back to the factory. We need to pray there, to break it. Michael didn't want to go back. Every part of him screamed to stay away, to never set foot in that place again. But the dreams were killing him, the hum a chain around his neck. 2 nights later, he drove back to Detroit with Ryan and Father Daniel. The factory looming in the distance, its smokestacks black against the night sky. The rain starting again as they pulled up to the gate. The day guards were gone, the place empty, the air heavy with the smell of ash and rain. Michael unlocked the gate, his hands shaking, the rusted metal creaking like a scream in the quiet. Father Daniel carried a small bag, his rosary in one hand, a vial of holy water in the other. His face calm but his eyes sharp, like he could see things they couldn't. They went to the stitching hall, the double doors still rusted, the padlock hanging loose from Michael's last visit. The air was colder than before, the smell of ash so strong it made Ryan cough, his eyes watering as he followed Father Daniel inside. The sewing machines were still there, their shapes like ghosts in the dark, the floor covered in ash and broken glass. Father Daniel knelt in the center of the room, his voice steady as he began to pray. The words of the Lord's Prayer filling the hall, their rhythm a shield against the cold. Michael stood by the door, his flashlight shaking, his eyes darting to the shadows, waiting for her, waiting for the hum. Ryan stayed close, his hands clenched, his breath fogging in the air. At 1:30 a.m., the hum started soft at first, then louder, the sewing machines coming to life, their needles moving on their own, the sound a chorus of whispers that made Michael's skin crawl. The woman appeared, sitting at the same machine, her burnt uniform hanging off her, her hands sewing, her head bowed. Father Daniel's voice grew louder, his prayers a chant against the hum. The air growing colder, the shadows stretching like they were alive. The woman turned, her face charred, her eyes black, her mouth open in a silent scream as she stood, her hands reaching for Michael, the hum turning to a wail that shook the walls. Ryan screamed, stumbling back, but Father Daniel didn't stop, his voice a thunder against the storm. His hands raised as he sprinkled holy water on the floor, the liquid hissing as it touched the ash. The woman screamed, a sound that wasn't human, a sound that tore at their ears, and then she was gone, the hum stopping, the machines falling silent, the air warming as the cold faded. Father Daniel finished his prayer, his breath heavy, his face pale but his eyes steady. "It's done," he said, his voice low, his hands trembling as he put the rosary back in his bag. "But this place, it's not clean. It will never be clean." Michael nodded, his legs weak, his heart still pounding. The woman's face burned into his mind. They left the factory, the rain washing away the ash on their boots, the gate creaking as they locked it behind them. Michael went back to his hometown, the dreams quieter now, the hum gone, the woman's face fading with each night. But the factory stayed with him, a shadow he couldn't shake, a weight on his chest that never fully lifted. He'd wake sometimes at 1:30 a.m., his heart racing, his ears straining for the hum, but it didn't come. Not anymore. Ryan stayed close, his worry a constant, his eyes searching Michael's face for signs of the nightmare. Father Daniel went back to his parish, his prayers a shield he carried with him, his dreams haunted by the factory, by the woman, by the screams he'd heard in the dark. The factory stood empty, its windows dark, its walls stained with the past, but the guards still talked, their voices low as they shared new stories. A new guard, a young man named Ethan, took the night shift a month later, his first night quiet until 1:30 a.m. When the landline rang, the static crackling, the sewing machines humming, the woman's sobs echoing through the line. He didn't last the week. Quit after 3 nights, his eyes hollow, his hands shaking as he told the others. "She's still there. She's always there." The factory kept its ghosts, its curse, its hunger, waiting for the next one to answer the call, to step into the dark, to become part of its story. A story that never ended, not for Michael, not for anyone.